My name's Jessica. I've been director of operations for over a decade at one of the largest logistics firms on the East Coast. I've handled 3 restructurings, 2 system overhauls, and 1 supply chain crisis that nearly tanked our entire revenue quarter. And last Tuesday, in front of 30 people, I was called dead weight. No warning, no email. Just Dylan, the newly crowned CEO, with a last name that opens more doors than a master key, walking into my ops review and saying it like a joke that didn't need a punchline. He leaned against the whiteboard I was presenting on, sipped from his iced matcha, and let it rip. The room froze. No one looked at me. They didn't have to. I felt it, this quiet, collective instinct to stay neutral, to not make eye contact with the person who just got set on fire in the middle of a meeting. Dylan smirked and moved on like he'd just tossed out a casual comment about quarterly goals, not my entire career. I didn't say a word. Just closed the slide deck, nodded at my team, and walked out. My heels echoed louder than my breath. My throat felt like sandpaper and my fingers were ice. I made it to the nearest bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the closed toilet lid like someone who had just survived an airstrike. 12 years. That's how long I'd been there. I'd built that operations system from nothing, carried us through a pandemic, and negotiated freight rates that saved the company millions. And none of it mattered. Not when someone like Dylan, who'd never spent a day on the warehouse floor, could walk in and erase me with 5 syllables and a green smoothie. What hit hardest wasn't the insult. It was the realization that this had been decided long before he opened his mouth. It wasn't a question in his mind. I was already an answer. The only thing left was to make it look like it was my time to move on. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of watching me break. Not in that room. Not ever. And definitely not before I played my own move. When I got back to my desk, my badge still worked. That was their first mistake. The second was thinking I'd quietly disappear with a severance package and a hollow thank you. I sat there staring at the message Dylan had scribbled on the post-it, and something in me clicked like a safe unlocking from the inside. For 12 years, I had played by their rules. I had smiled through budget cuts, taken the blame for their mistakes, and stood tall while others fell. I knew every corner of the supply chain, every vulnerability, every person who made the real gears turn. And I'd kept notes, lots of notes. So when I signed the exit paperwork that afternoon, my hand didn't shake. My pulse didn't even rise. I smiled at HR, thanked Dylan for the opportunity, and walked out with the same calm I'd use on a broken shipment manifest. Because I wasn't just leaving, I was already moving. Revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with clarity. And I'd been seeing clearly for a long time. It wasn't just Dylan. It was every meeting I wasn't invited to. Every project someone else got credit for. Every time my decisions were questioned by people who had never once delivered a shipment on time. The first real move I made came months before Dylan ever walked into that room. Back then, it was just instinct. A conversation with someone at Ironlink Freight who let slip that the founder was looking to retire. I bought him coffee, then lunch, then flew to Atlanta on my own dime and left with more than a handshake. I didn't tell anyone, not even my husband. Just filed the paperwork, encrypted the files, and locked everything away like a fire escape plan I hoped I'd never need. But after Dylan's performance, I needed it. Not just to get even, to reclaim what was mine before they buried it under fake smiles and better suits. Every day after that was precision. I tracked vendor contracts. I reviewed freight costs and partnership clauses. I studied board member habits like a student before finals. I didn't want revenge. That screamed. I wanted it to whisper slow and steady until it wrapped around Dylan's world and turned the lights off. By the time my last day rolled around, the company had already lost me. They just hadn't realized it yet. And I had never been more ready. Not for war, for justice. The kind they never see coming until it's already done. It started at a regional logistics expo in Kansas City. Nothing fancy, just a few hundred vendors, lukewarm coffee, and name tags printed in Comic Sans. I wasn't even supposed to be there, but I'd swapped shifts with a junior analyst who had a dentist appointment and figured one day of small talk was worth the favor. That's when I ran into Hank, CEO of Iron Link Freight. He was leaning against a folding table, nursing what looked like his third black coffee and chewing on a peppermint like he hated both. We'd met once before, years back, during a pricing dispute. He remembered my name, said I was the only ops director who ever read the fine print on his fuel surcharge clause. We talked. At first, just shop talk. Freight delays, port congestion, and new routing tech. But somewhere between complaints about Atlanta's weather and jokes about outdated WMS platforms, he mentioned it. Offhand, like it wasn't the linchpin to a kingdom. He was retiring. I didn't blink. Just nodded, tucked that sentence behind my eyes, and kept the conversation moving. Because you don't pounce on opportunity. You coax it slowly like drawing out a hidden card in a high-stakes game. I asked questions about his kids, his golf swing, and the new compliance chief he clearly couldn't stand. Then I invited him to dinner. Neutral place. Local steakhouse 2 blocks from the expo. He hesitated, but agreed. Said I had a better read on people than his last 2 recruiters combined. That night, over ribeye and a glass of something red and overpriced, I laid it out. I didn't want Iron Link's name. I wanted its leverage, its position, its long-standing contracts that were frankly better than they should be given their outdated tech. I told him I could preserve the system he built without gutting it. Quietly, respectfully, off the books. He didn't say yes right away. Just studied me like a freight report with too many inconsistencies. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a napkin, and slid it between us. Scribbled a single sentence. 1 line of intent, 1 signature. No witnesses, no timestamp. That napkin lived in my sock drawer for 3 months, folded 4 times, pressed flat beneath a stack of plain white ankle cuts. It was more than paper. It was a fuse waiting for the right spark. And I knew when the time came, it would burn just fine. The wire went through on a Thursday morning, just after 9. 3 accounts, 3 sources, all combed through twice to make sure nothing looked off. The first was simple. My severance. 6 months of salary bonus included neat and clean and meant to buy my silence. I used every cent. The second was older. A small portfolio I'd built during the early crypto craze. Not enough to retire on, but enough to turn heads when liquidated all at once. I'd held it for years, like a backup plan I hoped I'd never need. Now it was gone with a few clicks and 2-factor codes. No hesitation. The third account was the hardest. It sat under a different name. My sister's. A trust she'd left behind when cancer ended her fight 6 years ago. It was supposed to be for something sacred, something she believed in. College fund for a future niece, maybe a down payment on a house when I remarry. Not this. I opened the file twice before typing the transfer. Stared at her name, her birthday, the little note she left at the bottom that just said, "Make it count." My hands were steady, but my chest felt like stone. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was a legacy. I wired the last of it before noon. Then I sat in silence, laptop closed, breathing in the stillness like it would answer for me. No celebration, no fist pump, just the heavy calm of someone who's just thrown all their cards down on the table and told the dealer to flip. When it was done, I drove to the office building where Iron Link's paperwork would change hands. No sign on the door. No receptionist. Just a flickering light in a hallway that smelled like burnt coffee and old paint. Hank met me in jeans and a frayed sweatshirt. He handed me a folder, nodded once, and said, "Welcome to the storm." I signed. Not with excitement, but with reverence. Because this wasn't just business. It was a sacrifice. And it needed to hurt a little to matter. That day I didn't just buy a company. I buried a part of myself to do it. And from that grave, something stronger would rise. The text came in at 3:47 p.m., just as I was finishing the draft of Iron Link's restructuring memo. Unknown number, just 5 words. We should talk. Kathleen. My fingers froze above the keyboard. Not because of fear, but because I hadn't heard that name in years, and certainly not in this context. Kathleen Carrington was more than Dylan's mother. She was the architect of Whitmore's brand dominance in the early 2000s, the kind of executive who could sell ice to Alaskans and leave them thanking her for the bill. When she vanished after her divorce from the company's founder, the rumor mill said it was a golden parachute soaked in silence money. But people like her don't retire. They wait. I stared at the screen, rereading the message, trying to decode it like it held more than it showed. There was no follow-up, no address. Just her name, sharp and clean, like a signature she knew would be recognized. My stomach twisted. If Kathleen was reaching out, it meant she knew. Not guessed. Knew. I let it sit for an hour. Poured myself a coffee I didn't drink. Paced the kitchen floor like I was waiting for lightning. Then came the second message. 1 line, tomorrow, 7 p.m., 5th and Monroe. Ask for the back table. That wasn't a request. It was a move. Kathleen had been the ghost in every strategy room for over a decade. People said she once fired a VP during a charity gala without spilling her wine. Others claimed she brokered 3 mergers from a hospital bed. Whatever the truth, I knew this much: she didn't reach unless she wanted to pull strings. Still, the timing was wrong. Or maybe perfect. I'd just secured a majority interest in Iron Link. I hadn't filed it publicly yet. Only 4 people on Earth knew. So how did she... That question kept me up. Kathleen wasn't just watching. She had access. Maybe had always had it. By morning, I was still undecided. Curiosity pushed harder than caution. I needed to know what she wanted. Because if I were going to play chess, I had to see every piece on the board. And Kathleen Carrington was never just a player. She was the hand that set it all in motion. The restaurant was dim, all brass fixtures and velvet booths. The kind of place where no one asked for a menu and the sommelier knew your secrets before you sat down. Kathleen was already there, swirling a glass of wine the color of power. She didn't smile when I approached, just gestured to the seat across from her like this was a meeting we'd both known would happen. She slid an envelope across the table before the waiter could even bring water. Inside were 3 photos. One of Dylan shaking hands with Iron Link's founder. Another scanned share agreement dated 2 weeks before my buyout. And the third, an email thread between Dylan and a man named Clark from Legal discussing acquisition strategy. My stomach tightened. He'd tried to beat me to it. He just didn't check who held the swing shares. Kathleen leaned back, her voice calm and low. Dylan thought he could play in a world he didn't understand. She told me I'd saved the company from being gutted and flipped like a foreclosure. She wasn't angry at him. She was disappointed. He lacked vision, and more importantly, timing. I asked her what she wanted. She tilted her glass eyes sharp. A silent alliance, she said. I had the position. She had the intel. Together, we could dismantle every piece of the empire Dylan had borrowed his way into. She didn't need credit, just revenge. I out front. He sheen the shadows. It should have felt manipulative, but it didn't. It felt precise, chosen. Like after all the years of being ignored, I'd become exactly the kind of threat the system never saw coming. I didn't say yes. I didn't need to. Kathleen raised her glass. A toast, she said, to women who finish what their sons start. And just like that, I was in. Not convinced. Not loyal, but in. Because sometimes the most dangerous allies wear heels and know where the bodies are buried. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Long glass walls, polished table 12 leather chairs, filled with men in navy suits and one woman in burgundy. Dylan was already seated at the head, flipping through a folder like he expected a casual discussion. His smirk didn't flicker when I walked in, but his fingers paused. That was enough. I didn't wait for pleasantries. I laid the black folder on the table, opened it, and began. First, an email chain between Dylan and Clark from legal outlining a proposal to acquire IronLink through an offshore proxy. Next, financial statements showed transfers from a holding company tied to his college roommate. And last, a notarized draft share agreement unsigned, but time-stamped detailing terms to fold IronLink into Whitmore Logistics under a new shell entity. No one spoke. The CFO turned pale. One board member leaned forward, scanning the dates. Another pulled out his glasses like it would make the betrayal easier to see. Dylan cleared his throat, tried to claim it was exploratory, strategic. But the room wasn't listening to him anymore. They were listening to me. I explained how I'd acquired a controlling interest in IronLink 2 days before Dylan's failed attempt. I detailed his conflict of interest, his misuse of internal data, and the risk it posed to shareholder trust. Then I paused, looked him straight in the eye, said he didn't just underestimate me. He gambled with the company's future because he thought no one would notice. He stood up, voice tight, accusing me of sabotage. Called me unstable, emotional, and retaliatory. That was his final mistake. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the napkin, the one Hank had signed. I slid it across the table like a final move on a chessboard, and said you tried to buy what I already owned. Robert Whitmore, Dylan's father and the company's founder, was silent until that moment. Then he leaned back, removed his glasses, and told his son to step outside. Not a request, a command. Dylan hesitated, fists clenched, jaw twitching. But he went, because there was nothing left to say. When the door shut, Robert turned to me, asked if what I wanted was money. I said no. I wanted a public separation, a statement dissolving Whitmore's ties to IronLink and a signed resignation from Dylan by the end of the day. He blinked once, then nodded, and just like that, the empire shifted. Not with a scream, with a signature. And for the first time in years, I was the one holding the pen. The press release went out the next morning. Dylan had stepped down to pursue new opportunities. No mention of the boardroom, the folder, or the napkin. Just a clean break sterilized for public consumption. On paper, it was a win, a bloodless coup, but it didn't feel like a victory. Kathleen disappeared the same day. No calls, no texts. The number she used was disconnected. I checked the trust that had quietly backed her stake in IronLink. Dissolved. Her LinkedIn gone. Her apartment empty. It was like she'd never existed, like she'd always planned to vanish once the curtain fell. And I was left on stage, alone. I should have been celebrating. But I sat in my office, staring at the city skyline, wondering if I'd just inherited an empire, or been handed a crown forged from someone else's vendetta. The silence was louder than applause. No more meetings, no more messages. Just quiet, endless and unnerving. The staff walked on eggshells around me. Some avoided eye contact. Others smiled too much. I could feel the shift, respect mixed with fear. They didn't see me as a leader. They saw me as the woman who took down a dynasty. And maybe they were right. Maybe that's all I was now. I started waking up at 3 a.m. Not from stress, but from the weight of everything unsaid. The cost of control. The price of becoming the person who finishes the war instead of running from it. Kathleen had warned me once. Power doesn't forgive softness. Now I understood, and I hated that she was right. I'd won. But the game had taken something from me. A part I didn't realize I'd traded until the room was quiet and the fight was over. And no one was left to tell me what came next. Only me. And the echo of footsteps in a hallway I now owned entirely. I walked into the boardroom with no notes, no legal counsel, and no pre-written speech. Just me and the weight of what came next. They were all there, waiting. Not for answers, but for a signal. Was I going to claim the throne or dismantle it? I looked around and said the only words that felt right. I'm not here to be queen. I'm here to build something that outlasts all of us. Something rooted in competence, not connections. In truth, not strategy. The room didn't clap. They nodded, slowly. Like they understood this wasn't about power anymore. It was about purpose. That afternoon, I met with every department head. One-on-one, no scripts, just real conversations about what worked, what didn't, and what they'd build if someone actually listened. For the first time, they did more than follow. They leaned in. I wasn't feared. I was trusted. I still wake up early. Still hear Kathleen's voice sometimes in the quiet. But it's not a warning anymore. It's a memory. A reminder of how close I came to becoming what I fought. And how I chose something harder instead. Leadership without ego. Legacy without blood. I didn't come back to rule. I came back to rebuild. Brick by brick. Voice by voice. And this time, I'll make sure no one has to burn just to be heard.